morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sustainable Tairāwhiti meeting. I'm going to ask Councillor Pahuru Huriwai to open with Karakia for us. Thank you.
Tēnā tātai, whamari tātai, spēra hits, Ai te atua tēnei mātou e tuku whakamoemiti ki a koe I tēnei ata kia manaki tia tēnei huinga, kia potai ngā whakaaro I roto I te rangi Māori e me te aroha o tātou hāpori I Tairāwhiti. Tēnei anō te inoi ki a koe, kia uhia te kōrero hā ki runga I ngā whānau pani, I tēnei wā, tērā o te kengi tū heitia I whakato mai rā ki roto o tūranga waiwai. Koe nei te inoi ki a koe, ai anei, ake nei, amine.
Thank you for that. Okay, before we start, please make sure your phones and computers are turned down. I have apologies today for Councillor Ria, Councillor Tibble and Councillor Robinson. Do I have a mover?
Sorry, Councillor Parata for lateness, she's on her way.
She's on her way, just lateness for Councillor Parata. Moved by Councillor Foster.
No, I've got a problem.
What's your problem?
Well, I've got a councillor who hasn't been turning up for the last 6 weeks, and I think it needs to be talked about a bit more. We just can't sit back and take apologies when people aren't turning up. So, in this particular instance, Councillor Robinson hasn't been here for quite a long time overseas, and it's just not acceptable. So I'd just like that table, please.
Thank you. Do I have a mover for the apologies? Thank you. A seconder for the apologies? All in favour? Contrary? Any declarations of interest? Nothing? Okay, I'm going to take you to confirmation of our non-confidential minutes, which is on page 4. That's been sent out by Annie quite some time ago, so everyone had the opportunity to take a good look at those. Any issues?
Move your worship.
Moved by Councillor Wharehinga. Do I have a seconder for the minutes? Councillor Telford. Any concerns, issues you want to raise about the correctness of what was discussed on that day? If not, all in favour?
Aye.
Contrary, carried. Okay, I take you to our activity register on page 11. 10. So everything is still in progress. All the dates were updated. Thank you, staff. So we look forward to all of that being reported on the 27th of November. Any questions in regards to our action register? Not. Leave of absence? None. Acknowledgements and tributes. We did yesterday, for those of you that were not part of the TRMP, Councillor Wharehinga made a beautiful tribute to Kingi Haitia. Thank you for that, and also mentioned this morning in Councillor Pahuru Huriwai's Karakia. So thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to invite Julian Kohn. Welcome, Julian. Thank you for coming to talk to us today. Councillors, I invited Julian a while back. You come and sit right next to me in the hot seat. A little while back, invited Julian to come and talk to us and just make sure. How are you? Welcome. Lovely to see you.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. And usually we have 5-minute deputations, but I said to Julian, let's have a good catch-up, so 20 minutes, and then as public deputations work, I'm not sure if you know how democracy support work or if you know someone in democracy support. But so today there's no debates, there are no issues being discussed. We are here to listen to you, and the floor is yours, and at the end councillors might have some questions to ask, clarification of what you discussed, and then we take it from there. But the warmest of welcome to you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Tēnā koutou, everybody.
You can do whatever, the floor is yours.
Okay, look, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. Obviously, there's an awful lot of conversation and discussion around our industry at the moment, and the Mayor thought it would be appropriate for me to come along and just give you a little bit of a sort of a 101 of where the industry is at and where we believe we need to go. And to answer any questions you might have around sort of what's been happening and what appropriate steps might be going into the future. So I'd like to just first acknowledge my whānau support out the back there, Patrick and Dana. They are deeply ensconced in what's going on in our space at the moment, and I must say that our relatively newly minted Member of Parliament, Dana, is been very useful and helpful in giving us access to Wellington, and the short time that I've been working with her, she has been all over not only our industry but all over the issues which are going on in our community at the moment, both socially and economically. So I want to acknowledge her as being someone that I think is very passionate about the district and will do a very good job for us. So Dana, thank you for your assistance today. And of course, there won't be anybody in the room who doesn't know Patrick Willick, who's a long-standing member of the community and a senior member who is a raconteur on all things to do with helicopter rescues, and along with myself is on the Helicopter Rescue Trust and has been doing a sterling job for many years. He's also the chair of the Tairāwhiti Forestry Action Group, as I think it's now called. The Minister had 3 names for this and he didn't like any of them until he came up with a 3rd one, so Patrick's going to talk very quickly about that. So okay, just to kick off here, for those of you who don't know me, who am I? This is one of my favourite subjects to talk about, me. I'm a 65-year-old forester. I've been in the forest industry for 45 years and I am passionate about forestry, I'm passionate about the community, and I want to see this community thrive, as I'm sure every one of us do. We were in this room with a delegation of about 15 or 20 forestry industry members, very senior ones, to talk to the Mayor about what was going on, and she welcomed us and literally took the words out of my mouth when she was talking about the need for an environmental, an economic and a socially balanced opportunity in our community. So we are very much in line with that. As the current chair of the Eastland Wood Council, I can tell you that that very much aligns with our aspirations in terms of what forestry nirvana might look like. The problem that we're having at the moment from the industry's point of view is that while we're trying to achieve this balance between those 3 aspirations and hit the target in the middle, we see that that target is very heavily going off to the left or right or the bottom, and if we don't get it back in balance, then we are going to have some very significant and perverse outcomes in respect to what's happening in the industry right now and well into the future. So what do I mean by that? Just a few fun facts here for everybody. This is a study which is Tairāwhiti Trust has just commissioned through Infometrics, and it indicates that the forest industry, logging and wood paper industry locally generates 32% of our tradable activities in the district, so very significant economically. Another fun fact, the last wood debris survey that was done on Waikanae Beach after our last event indicated that 48% of the debris from the last event was not Pinus radiata, so it did not come out of any forests. I understand the council has also done some surveys at the same time, not sure exactly what those numbers were, but it then begs the question, where did the rest of it come from? It begs the question, well, what do we do about the other 50%? And it tells us that we live in a woody environment and there will always be wood coming down the rivers and the streams. There will always be sediment coming down the woods and the streams. You cannot stop it. It's a matter of managing it appropriately to a level which is acceptable for the community. That's something that the industry has been working on for some years, perhaps the last 6 years, in that the industry, although you can't see it unless you go out into the forestry, has been working very, very hard to try and mitigate those issues. Give you some examples where you used to spend $15,000 building a skid. We're now spending $50,000. We're doing more benching, we're doing more earth movement, we're doing more water control. We're pulling more slash up off the side of the skids and putting it in appropriate places where it's far more stable. We used to spend commonly on average $100,000 a kilometre building a road. we now spend 3 times that just trying to make better roads to mitigate the issues which we've been having since these weather events have occurred. Before we had weather events, it didn't seem to be an issue. You know, there wasn't woody debris coming down, there wasn't so much issue with sediment coming into our waterways. But we have got climate change, we just have to accept that, and then we understand that it needs to make improvements with what it's doing. So, just to dispel some dispersions about some people believe that these big bad forest industry owners are sending all their profits overseas. This is public information which is from Aotearoa Forest here locally. That red ink indicates that they haven't sent a cent overseas for the last 3 years. They're literally bleeding money. They spend $50 million a year in this district, $1 million a week. Why are they doing that? You need to ask the board. If I was a board member, and the other companies are very similar, if I was a board member of these companies, I'd be seriously asking myself why we are still in Gisborne. What are we doing here? Because we're not making money. Capital is very mobile. Those companies could very easily decide tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, I don't know, that they'll cut their losses and they'll go to Australia or South Africa or somewhere else where they can make better money in the forest industry. Forestry in New Zealand generally is extremely difficult. Forestry in Gisborne is worse than extremely difficult. Everybody I talk to in the industry at the moment is, oh, we're not going to invest in Gisborne. One of the local forest investors here, who you would all know, very big international company, said to me the other day, Julian, my overseas board are telling me that we could invest $100 million in a processing operation in Gisborne. I'm telling them, this is the New Zealand manager, I'm telling them not to bother at the moment because of the issues we are having about being able to extract our timber off the hill and put it into those processing facilities. So the story I'm telling you today is a good news, bad news, good news, question mark story. And I'll come to that a little bit later. So the first issue is, how do we stop the rot? How do we stop those forest companies from moving away out of our district tomorrow or next week or next year? And there are specific terms and conditions in our current harvesting and roading rules that are literally stopping forest companies from harvesting. I'll give you an example. Standard condition harvesting and planting consent, Clause 89, there's about 125 of them last time I looked. Clause 89 basically says that you cannot emit any debris. Council can't give us a definition of what debris is. Is it a rock? We don't know, there's not a lot else up there. You cannot emit any sediment and you cannot emit any woody debris into those streams and waterways ever. Not today, not tomorrow, not 5 years' time, ever. Now that condition is absolutely impossible, as I'm sure you know. You cannot do that. So that condition, along with others, shall we say, is making those forest managers go, okay, I can't comply with that condition, so I'm not going to harvest. Or, even more perverse, they decide to A, shut the gate and walk away, as I said, so there's no activity in the forest, there's no harvesting, no silviculture, no planting, no management. What happens to those forests next time we have a weather event? Instead of 2-ton logs coming down streams and creeks, we're going to have 5-ton or 8-ton. And they'll have nice big bowling ball root balls on them, which will be coming down and landing on our beaches and doing other perverse infrastructural damage. Is that really what we want? The most profitable way to run a forest at the moment is to do that, is to lock the gate and sell the carbon. carbon the other day was $61 a tonne. It's gone up from 45. It's actually quite a good business model if you're into that sort of thing. If your land qualifies, then you can make very good money out of it. So why wouldn't they do that? They don't want to do that. They want to be harvesting and they want to be processing and they want to be doing things in Gisborne which makes everybody happier and we get a community that we all want. They can make some money and then they can send some money overseas. But they can't do it at the moment. So, those are the perverse outcomes. Just quickly, another example of that, and it's happening right now in a couple of standard conditions, is the forest manager applies for a logging, harvesting, replanting consent. The council comes to them and says, okay, well you can harvest that, but I want you, in 40% of your area, I want you to replant it in a non-productive species. Manager says, what shall I do then? He said, I will put it in poplars. The manager said, well, what's the basis for that? Is that the best idea? What's the science behind it? What's the research? What's the explanation? What do you know about poplars? Oh, well, I just think that's a good idea. And I want you to pay for it all, and I want you to manage it, 40% of your unproductive forest forever, and pay for that. Now, not only is that a perverse outcome for the investors, those investors are not overseas people, they're mums and dad investors like you and me. Not only is it a bad, perverse outcome for those, but that forest manager might decide to reapply or change his consent and say, right, I'm not going to harvest the worst areas. I'm just going to harvest the best areas. So harvest the best areas will be an economic disaster for the shareholders. Those trees will be left there. Now, what happens if they're right next to a bit of infrastructure? Critical infrastructure. Those trees are going to stay there forever. What's the outcome? Is that the outcome we want in terms of our land change and revegetation? If you want to revegetate those areas, you're probably better off cutting them down and starting again. But currently, the conditions in the consent and the way the regulations work literally don't allow you to do that. I call those perverse outcomes. So they have perverse long-term consequences of what we are all trying to achieve in our triangle. So you're going to end up with an environmental disaster 10 or 20 or 30 years down the track, which all of our children and our bukapuna are going to end up having to cope with. We've already made mistakes with the East Coast Forestry Project where we put trees. We've made mistakes in the first plantings of the radiata here back in 1959 up on Railway Road and other places. But don't get me wrong, radiata has a place on our land, but it just goes back to the right place, the right tree. That's what we've got to do. So, the good news story is if we get our settings right and we can make things happen in an appropriate way, then there are huge opportunities out there. I'm constantly having conversations with potential forest investors, as I just previously described, who want to invest here because we have a huge resource here. We just have to unlock it. Forest managers will not sign supply contracts with processors, and again, it's happening right now, because they are not confident that they can get the trees off the ground. Why is that happening? Go back to those stopping the rot here with these terms, standard terms and conditions. The council does not have enough capability, resources, experience and knowledge to be able to promulgate those conditions in an appropriate way, which will allow us to get the balance in that triangle that I'm talking about. We need environmental protection, but to have environmental protection, we need money to do that, and you need people in the game who can afford to make that happen, and that will give us the social outcomes that we all want. Okay, I think I might stop there. Could I ask perhaps Dana and Patrick to say a few quick words, and then happy to take questions.
I'm going to speak from there.
Excuse me, Patrick, you need to come to the front.
I can stand.
No?
So, morning, I'm Patrick Willock. I've been asked by the Minister to be the independent chair of the now newly called Tairāwhiti Forest Action Group. I'm an absolute independent. I'm not there representing any faction or that sort of
Just
thing.
for councillors, that is the Woody Debris Task Force that the Minister, it just gave it a new name, but just for connection, that is that.
He picked it because I told him we weren't going to sit around for half a day working out a name. We wanted to do stuff rather than do that. But anyhow, my job really is to bring together the groups, and the groups that we've got on there are Julian and one other guy out of the forest industry. We've got two from the council, Rod Sheridan and Kerry Hudson, Federated Farmers, Toby Williams, and Ngāti Porou representative Ngārangi Walker. And I'm independent. So the Minister wants some action. He doesn't want a lot of talk, and conditional on the money coming to the district is going to be getting some action. So my job is to get everybody there cooperating. And I have to report that our first meeting, which went over one afternoon and the next morning, the level of cooperation was great. I think right at the outset we need to acknowledge the work that the council had already done, and a lot of people wouldn't know the extent of that, but the work is already undergoing. And part of our brief too is to try and provide some direction as to how we can mitigate this going into the future. I'm a little bit nervous about that because I've personally been involved in soil conservation in this district for 50 years or more, and I have seen you talked about poplars before, I've seen 40 or 50 foot poplars just cartwheeled down a hill from the top to the bottom when Mother Nature decides to come along. The other thing is that we're not dealing with a new problem. I've got photos of Waikanae Beach in 1894, absolutely littered. So this has been going on for many, many years. It doesn't stop us attempting to find a way forward, but my word of caution is that nobody holds the sort of mortgage on intelligence or the way to address these things, and the best laid plans, as Julian pointed out, were planted radiata back in the 1950s, do go awry. So my determination is to keep the people talking. The minute one person leaves our group because they see it being a talk fest, then we've failed. So we've got to keep them all working, and for that we need the cooperation of both. We acknowledge council as the regulator, and so we've got to work within that, but we want to take away any barriers that are in there between the groups. So in a nutshell, that's what I'm there to do, and we'll see by the end of the year whether we've made any progress, whether I've still got a job.
Dana, would you like to say something?
Oh, well, no, it's a politician, you never pass up the opportunity to say something, do you? So, it would be remiss of me not to do that. Thank you, Your Worship. Good, thank you. Look, thank you everybody. Tēnā tātou, it's wonderful to be here and to address you. I just wanted to say a couple of things. Firstly, I wanted to thank you all for the work that you've done in this space, and for the point that we've come to where we can sit around the table and work together on short, medium and long-term solutions in this space. It is a very challenging environment, as we know. It can be emotionally charged, it is tricky, but it is also a critical component of our region and our community. And if I could just say, for me, it's important that we understand all of those aspects in terms of the social, economic and environmental return, and find the balance that we can all live with. So for me, that's the critical component. I think the government has invested about $110 million in this region in getting woody debris and sediment off beaches and out of rivers. And that's an enormous amount of money, and as a society we can't continue to do that. So this work is critical, and it's really important for us to be able to work together. I acknowledge the council's role in that, and I acknowledge the fact that you're sitting at the table with we in the forestry sector to do this work, which is really commendable. I am a supporter of the forestry sector, and largely because of the impact and the contribution it makes to the economic sustainability of our region and our town and our community in terms of jobs and the the money that is spent in our town and many of those businesses that you might not even think about, the tyre businesses, the diesel mechanics, all of the places that employ our people and look after us as a community. So it's critical that we find a good way forward. So I'm always there as the support in Wellington for that, and I'm happy to be able to knock on doors where need be if that's the case. But I am fully confident in the ability of Patrick and the team to do this. Patrick has a long history of being a great leader in these kinds of challenging environments. So I look forward to working with you and to having a good outcome at the end of this. So thank you. Thank you.
All good. Councillors, are there any questions of clarification of Julian at this stage? Did you put your hand up? Councillor Cranston.
Yeah, thanks for your clarity there, Julian. It's a good presentation and it is good clarity. You've given the EBITDA of Ara2 as an example of people possibly not wanting to invest in Gisborne. What would the EBITDA of other regions look like? Hawke's Bay, Northland and that, would their big company EBITDAs be a lot different?
I've seen about 9 of them, Andy, but I can tell you of the 8 or 9 of them, I think 7 of them were red ink. So no, we haven't got it along. And just point of clarification, those numbers are largely as a result of the current log market situation in China, of course, which is just terrible. So I don't want you to think that it's all solely a Tairāwhiti issue. It's a international issue. But what is contributing very significantly to that red ink is the issues around the consent costs of compliance. So every time you add cost to compliance, you're effectively bringing your ability to make money in a forest closer and closer to town. The further away you go from town, the higher the costs go up. The more you have to put into consent planning and discussions with the council and back and forth reports and so on, the higher the costs go. And these consents are very expensive at the moment. One that I looked at the other day was over $100,000 just to get consent through. We've been having debates with the council about woody debris, slash catches and things like that. One company spent $250,000 on planning and applying for this, and then it got turned down. And 2 years later, we're having the conversation about, maybe slash catches are a good idea all of a sudden. So, those sort of things don't endear us to spending money in the region when we have those sort of issues. It could be certainly streamlined. The relationship between the forest industry and many of the other council is very positive. And we understand that, we've got a cloud hanging over us in respect of what's happened in the past, which we all need to get over and just move forward on. All this legislation and prosecution of things which is going on, it has been happening for some time, and we acknowledge mistakes have been made, but we are learning by doing. And I think that needs to be acknowledged.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You did answer some of the questions I was going to ask, because I was just asking about the potential dialogue between the industry and council and our consenting processes. So there's obviously difference of opinion within those realms, and we have got a lot of expertise in this region, probably the most in New Zealand, because we're dealing with high sediment area and the East Coast Forestry Project, which has been there since the 80s. So I find it really frustrating to hear that you're having so much problems with our consenting process, and how are we going to get through that? I mean, is that one of the things that Patrick and his team are trying to address and to mediate, or?
Patrick is woody debris. You're talking about consent.
Well, yes, but the problem with the consent is the woody debris part of it, because, as Julian said, it's impossible to mitigate 100% of any, and it's not identifying. If it's not identifying, it's pine, slash, or soil. I mean, I find that quite disturbing, actually. That is actually in a consent itself, and hearing huge progress. So there seems to be.
Question. Question, please.
Well, I can probably answer some of that.
Education question.
I can probably answer some of what you said.
Okay, my question is Patrick the mediator?
There is another
Not in
piece.
that case.
There's another piece of work going on alongside the work that Patrick and the team will be doing, which is government-led, which changes to the national standard on commercial forestry, and that will provide some clarity and some, I guess, some future instruction on how those kinds of issues will be managed. So there will be a clearer space, but you might have something.
So what's happened here over the years, the last few years with the major events, Tairāwhiti and all that has affected nationally the MES and the decisions that have been made consequently since then.
Yes, it has, Councillor. But I want to acknowledge that in your council offices you have some very experienced and capable individuals. The problem is that we are dealing with a relatively new problem in terms of the added issues around climate change, and it's something, as I said, the forest industry is learning by doing, and I think the council to some extent is doing that as well. But the problem is that we need to fix the issue now, so we need additional expertise, additional knowledge from outside the region which has that experience and knowledge, which can just sit around the table and advise those people who are actually writing the terms and the conditions and the wording, because that's the level it comes down to. Because 3 weeks ago we sat around here for 4 days and that's all we talked about for 4 days. And the end of it, right now, I'm not even sure whether we've made any progress at all. And that's the third time we've had those discussions. And if you want to ask one thing which is stopping this industry moving forward, it is that. There it is.
I'm just going to ask Nadine to comment as well.
I think, and because this is a public deputation, we don't enter into any debate, but I think actually what the council needs to see is what the work that has been done in this space, because the consents are there for a purpose in terms of managing the behaviour that was seen, and we have workshopped through that, so I think it's worthwhile putting that all on the table, and then we can have a conversation, an informed conversation with both sides of the equation.
Okay, any more questions of Julian? Josh, Teddy, and last one, Colin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Thank you very much, Julian, for the presentation. Just to preface my question, you're right. There's a lot of how you explained your group is that there's a lot of positive goodwill to try to find the solution in regards to that. I wanted to ask you in regards to the example you gave around replanting poplar, replanting that after that pine is harvested, and the suggestion was replanting poplar. In that spirit of that cohesiveness of the group, have you or EWC done any research or are intending to do any research in regards to what planting could look like, non-pine planting could look like in those, I guess, hazardous spaces, for lack of a better word, in order for us to kind of contribute all of our mātauranga together, all of our knowledge together, in order to be able to create solutions, that Te Ao Māori saying, your contribution, my contribution in the basket provides for all of us.
Yeah, well, the Wood Council is engaged with a group that Nadine set up, the transition group, which has had a couple of meetings now. So we are involved in that conversation. Obviously, it's very early days. We've only had a couple of meetings, but I think Nadine probably agree. It's pretty positive, and it seems to be heading in the right direction. And there are many stakeholders in that, obviously not just forestry. But the forest industry has done research on alternative species, including native, in respect of the Forest Research Institute. Originally it was set up many years ago by the government, and the offtake of that is Scion Research. So yes, there is a large resource of science and operational experience around the practicalities of land use change and options for replanting. So, but we're not the be-all and end-all in that respect. There is a lot of science in the country around revegetation. And woody debris is the best way to stop landslide movement and sediment movement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, just in all our workshops and everything, we've based our opinions on 80% of woody debris on beaches being Pinus radiata. You said in your presentation that it's 48%. It's quite a big difference, and for me, that changes opinions and costs and everything a lot. I'd just be interested in getting a combined what it actually is, because that's not 5 or 10% different. That's from 48% to 80%, and we're basing all our conversations on 80%. Yeah, I'd like to sort of how can we resolve that so we have a joint.
Good man, Teddy.
Okay, good question, councillor. So it's 52% Pinus radiata, 48% non-species, and that was done on the last weather event, which the council is currently cleaning up now down on the town beaches between Waikanae. Obviously, that has been somewhat higher. We've done 2 other surveys, and I think the numbers, if I remember them correctly, were sort of 57 and 64%. And a couple of previous events, the council has done surveys on other beaches, and this one currently, I think, understand, the Wood Council did reach out to the council and suggest that we do a combined woody debris survey together. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, so we went out and did our own. Now, the science and the technology and the capability around there is quite specific. There are internationally recognised processes and methods in the industry which allows you to measure woody debris by species, by volume, by size, by diameter. It's very common. So the ability to do that in the proper process is there. It just needs to be followed. And then we could come up with some agreed number.
Colin, no, Larry, you've already asked a question.
Debbie's hand is up.
Colin, ask your question.
You had a list there of companies and products that were wanting to come here to process what would be small wood and potentially slash. My question is the reason that they can't come here is because they can't get a guaranteed supply of product?
In a word, I mean, there are a lot of different reasons why you wouldn't invest in any region in New Zealand, for all the, reasons that we understand about business. But the one that we are getting at the moment is, before we have the conversation about whether we can build a plant or apply for a building consent or the power issues or the labour issues, is why would we bother coming here when we can't guarantee that we're going to get supply? The forest companies, on the other hand, are saying, we're not going to sign a supply contract if we can't guarantee we can supply you. Why would you? And it all goes back to these terms and conditions in the consent. We can't get the wood off the hill, we can't supply, so we can't process, so we can't sell. Now remember, the port is an integral part of this too, which of course the council owns. The port is a forestry business. At the moment it's exporting annualised figures about 2.5 million tonnes a year. Andrew Gaddon will tell you that the alternative volumes that they send out of the port are 2,500 a year. I don't think you can run a port on 2,500 tonnes of kiwi.
Thank you. I've been writing stories about forestry for a long time and following it in council as well, and definitely have seen change. One thing that I can't get my head around, and this is what my question is about, is that obviously there has been change, there has been good practice, like there were a lot of deaths when mechanisation came in and people invested a lot of money into that. But obviously there's still rogue people out there who are not doing things right. So when it comes to court, why can't the central government make it a disincentive for any bad practices and make the fines astronomical, so that it's just not worthwhile doing it?
Like was just done with disability parks.
Yeah.
Perhaps I could just answer the first bit, Councillor. Yeah, I mean, the industry, there are still bad things happening in the industry, and we all accept that, but the Wood Council represents about 130,000 of 160,000 hectares of forest in the industry, and we cannot control the people who are outside the Wood Council. And the Wood Council is a voluntary organisation. So yes, things have been happening inappropriately, are still happening inappropriately to a lesser extent, I like to say, particularly within our group, and for some time, because of the hangover of what we've had in the past, will probably continue at a diminishing rate to carry on. So that's life. But I can't answer the legislative one.
I can't answer that on the Minister's behalf either. That would be slightly career limiting. I think we can definitely come back, but I think, you know, there is the changes to the National Environmental Standard coming, there are some changes to the RMA coming, there is some clarity sought. There is definitely has definitely been a change to operations to date following Gabrielle and other storms, in forest management practices. So we have seen some of that, and I think that the best option for us really is to work through these short, medium and long-term solutions so that we don't end up in the situation of prosecuting and fining people, because that's not the answer that we want. That's not helpful, because it means the same thing's still happening. So we need to actually sort out the front end of it.
Thanks. Councillor Pahuruhuriwa, you are going to tie a bow around our public deputation for us today. Thank you. You've got the last question.
Thank you very much. Tēnā koutou. Thank you for your presentation, Julian. And my question is for Patrick. Thank you for letting us know who's on the makeup of the board, of the group. I just wonder why there are no community representation, given that we received a substantial petition from community, and wonder if they were invited to be part of the group?
I had nothing to do with the makeup of the group. It was determined by the Minister, I imagine. There is one obvious group not there, and that's Te Atanga Mahaki, but I have approached them, and they're doing something, but they prefer to do it alone. So that's fine, you know. We're not there to dictate you should be part of it or not, but I have a good link any ground anyhow, so he and I will keep talking behind the scenes.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Patrick, for sharing your work and what's happening in your space. And I look forward to us working together, compromising, doing better for our people in our place, all of us.
Likewise. Thank you, everybody.
No worries. Take care, Julian. Okay, councillors. That was a very, very long 20 minutes, but informative, and thank you for your questions as well. We are going to talk about extraordinary business, none. Notice of motion, none. Adjourned business, no. Who do I welcome to the front for our paper? Good morning. Joanne, are you going to take us through?
I'm just going to introduce.
Good, thank you.
Morena koutou, I'm Joanne Ferry, the team leader of the Environmental Science team. This morning's information report that you have in front of you is related to how Council has been working with Aqua Aotearoa, or AAA, on getting a better understanding of water availability since 2021. We are doing a number of projects together covering surface water flows and groundwater, and today we are here to talk about some early results from Aqua mapping on the east coast, namely the northern parts. The Aqua mapping involved the helicopter with the hoop that some people may have seen in February. And so now I'd like to hand over to AAA, your presenters online, for this morning, and I'd like to introduce themselves.
Kia ora koutou katoa. I'm Jane Francis. I'm the program director for Aqua Aotearoa, which is a joint venture between Kānoa, the Provincial Growth Fund, and GNS Science. As Joanne said, thank you, Joanne. We've been working with your staff for the last 3 years undertaking water availability science to get a better understanding of the water that's available for the region. I'll just pass over to my colleagues to introduce themselves as well. Ben.
I'll jump in. Kia ora,
Yeah.
Ben Pascoe. So I'm working with Jane and Stu as project manager, so helping out with the the delivery and mechanics of it all. Helicopters across the 3 regions that we've been doing the surveying in, as well as all the drilling work and surface water gauging, working with the GDC staff. Thanks.
Okay, kia ora. So I'm Stuart Cameron. I work for GNS Science. I'm a groundwater scientist based in Waireki, Taupo. My role, and I look after a few teams, groundwater teams within GNS, but my role in this particular project is making sure that the program has the science resource behind it. So ensuring that we have the right scientists at the right time.
Thank you, Stu. So we've got a presentation. Is it best for us? I know that we've given it to your team, but if it's easier, we can just pop that up on the screen and run through it. That might be easiest if Ben shares that.
You said you were going to share screens and it's easier for you.
Yep, great. All right, so Ben's going to kick that off.
So Jane, I just want to ask you a few practical questions before we start, just to set the expectations here in the room. How long are you going to present to us? Do you want questions asked throughout the presentation, or do you want questions asked at the end?
We, as I understand, we have 20 minutes with you, so we're gonna run through about 6 slides, which will take us, up to 10 minutes, maybe not that long, and then it'll be open to you to ask questions.
Fantastic. So the floor is yours. We'll listen to your presentation, and then we'll keep our questions to the end.
Thank you. Ben. So, as Joanne said, this aquifer mapping work is one of a number of projects we're doing with you. And I've said a little bit there about it's a government and GDC funded project. So most of the project is funded through the Provincial Growth Fund, but GDC has also contributed funding, particularly for the northern catchments. Our funding mostly relates to the Poverty Bay work, and we will come back and talk to you about that a little bit later. But why we want to talk to you at the moment is we've been talking with communities up in northern Tairāwhiti about some of our early results, and so we wanted to make sure you were across them too as a funder of the project. As you can see there, we're flying in. We flew the helicopter, in Hicks Bay, Tairāwhiti, across the Waipu area and in Tolaga Bay. So we have been working quite closely with communities who are a bit nervous about us being up there and collecting data about water. So what we've been trying to do is put together some good information for them so they can understand what the information is and how it can benefit the region. All right, I'm going to hand over to Stu for the bulk of the presentation. He's going to talk about the science behind this, and then I'll come back and finish off, and then we'll open the floor to questions.
Okay, thanks, Jane. Ben, do you want to move to the next slide?
Oh. We've lost them all together.
We can, if you're having some issues on your side, Heather can bring up the presentation here for us.
Shouldn't have any problems.
Here we go. It's back.
One of those things. Okay. I think he's trying to maximize the screen size, the slide size for you.
From beginning. If only I knew.
icon that says from the beginning?
Yeah, that one. That's all right, we can see it.
You are having some issues, aren't you? Shall I see if I can do it, Ben?
I can try because I've got it on my screen. If it
Yeah.
works. Shall
Well,
I
why
do
don't
that?
you do it, Stu, and then you can paste it to your presentation too.
Okay. Share.
Apologies, everyone.
It's all good, no rush. Thank you, all good. Ben, the floor is yours.
Okay, that should be sharing.
Yeah,
maybe
that's sharing.
maybe
Good, yeah.
it is sharing. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So this is probably a slide that is already telling you something you already know. But what it is it puts our work into the context of the information that goes into freshwater decision making. At a council kind of level. So lots of data: climate, rainfall, sea level, Mataranga, river flows, topography. So our one is centered around that groundwater aquifer structure, but also the properties associated with those various geological formations and layers that make up the groundwater system. So we're just one part of the puzzle, but it's a part of the puzzle that's often been invested in, not just in Gisborne, but nationally as well. So moving to the next slide, hopefully. Is that the next slide?
Nope. There we go, all good.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is AEM, or aerial electromagnetic mapping? Like Jane alluded to, and you've probably seen it. It's helicopter based, flown aerially. Helicopters somewhere between 30 to 50 meters off the ground with this large sling and loop hanging beneath it. The helicopter carries a very large generator which sends an electromagnetic signal into the ground, and then that primary signal is returned back to the receiver on the helicopter loop, and that provides a measurement of the resistivity, or the electrical resistance of the ground, and it's sensitive to a number of geological and groundwater components. So that's rock type, porosity, permeability, which is really important for us and for water management, clay content. Clays are usually very low, have very low transmissiveness of water, moisture content, and other properties. And another important other property for the work in Gisborne is water quality, so salinity. So it picks up contrasts of water quality, especially salinity. And so you receive, we obtain this data out of the SkyTeam or the helicopter system, and then there's quite a lot of work in terms of interpretation of it. The data has to be converted into a data set that's actually meaningful in terms of the properties that we want to obtain from it. So go to the next slide just to show you what it looks like in reality. So this is the raw data that we, GNS, would receive from the provider. So it's flown in lines. In this instance, it's lines somewhat perpendicular to the coast. The reason for that is that allows us to pick up that intrusion of salt water or seawater if it is occurring. And so these two areas are Hicks Bay and Tairāwhiti. So the cross section on the right is just an example of that raw data. The data has a higher resolution at the surface. It's in the order of a meter or two, but by the time you get down to the limit of the penetration, which can be around 3 to sort of 500 meters, you're looking at about 30 meters vertical resolution. And the helicopter takes a signal every 20 meters, and so that's every 2 minutes we get an image, and the line spacings of the flights are about 200 meters. So it's a very, very dense data set. So moving to the next slide. So the early results of the survey suggest that the aquifer systems in the northern Gisborne areas are thin, and I'll show you the relative thinness of that compared to other regions in the next slide. But I think that's a very important point. The other important aspect is there's a lot of salinity in the system, especially at depth. So when you get below the alluvial gravels, sands and silts, you get into the marine beds, and they have high salinity. The East Coast, so probably the take-home message is there's not a big groundwater resource in these northern areas. So it will need to be managed appropriately according to that. So this is just showing you the relative thickness of these northern Gisborne areas compared to other areas of New Zealand where we have undertaken these SkyTEM surveys. So on the right, top right here, you can see them. This is a compilation of all areas. The thickness ranges somewhere between about 40 metres. I think the maximum depth we got was about 48 metres, thinning, to about 5 metres. This is the alluvial aquifer system. If you compare that to, say, Heretaunga Plains, that system in the middle is about 300 metres deep. And we also flew a survey up in Ahapuri Peninsula. That's inland from 90 Mile Beach, and that system varies between about 80 to 200 metres in thickness. So this is what the SkyTEM data showed, but it was also confirmed by the drilling that we did alongside or just after the SkyTEM. It's consistent, so it gives us good confidence in that SkyTEM data. So yeah, like I said, we've got quite a lot more work to do in interpretation of that data set before anything sort of is finalised and able to be released. And I think Jane can probably talk to this stuff better, but in terms of how this data is managed, we're certainly cognizant of the sensitivities of this data. So we'll work with council, iwi, and hapu around that aspect. And I think that's my last slide. I'll hand back to Ben, I think.
Yes, Stu, that's right. We are having a number of conversations. We're working with Hilton Collier and Josh. What's Josh's last name, Ben?
Hovell.
Josh Hovell.
Well, yes. Hovell. Thank you. And we're engaging with the communities up in the areas where we have mapped. One of the reasons we put together that last slide that Stu showed you was because of concerns the community have that the information will be used for people to come in and take water. What we wanted to show them was that while we're very early in the interpretation of the data, we haven't really embarked on that yet. Even at a high level, it's obvious that the systems aren't large, and so this data will, rather than being used to, for productive water purposes, will be used for protecting the water. I think that's the best use of the data. In terms of the work that we've got from here, as Ben mentioned, we've got 3 regions that we're doing this work with, so we're kind of sequencing the processing. And so for Tairāwhiti, that will happen in 2025, when that raw data that Stu showed you, that will have noise and interference in it from things like roads and power lines. So that gets cleaned out. We develop the resistivity model. We compare it to the information that's available from board data, and then work is done later in the year around developing the hydrogeological model, 3D maps, which can feed in then to your modelling at the council. Just looking at the other projects we're doing around surface water flows, some of the drilling work that you've been doing up north, we've partnered with you up there as well. And what we want to do for Northern Tairāwhiti is do what's called water budgeting. So bringing all that information together to tell us about how much how the water interacts between surface water and groundwater and what that tells you about how much is available, and that we're doing towards the end of next year as well. Yes, and once we've finished our work, we hand that back to you as the decision makers, council and community, and it gets put into your processes for setting allocations and limits. So that's probably us in terms of the presentation. Stu, do you want to stop sharing that, and then we can hand back to you for questions?
Let's start that style. Teddy, Rawinia, Rob, just go down that line. Go, Teddy.
Yeah, after reading this report, I was just wondering why we're doing northern and not the Poverty Bay flats, but you mentioned you're going to be doing the flats, and I'm quite interested in that.
Yes. Yes.
We're just wondering.
Yes, we're in the process of trying to put together a similar high-level schema from the early results, which is quite a different story than up the East Coast, and Stu might be able to tell you a bit more about that, but it's more a story around salinity and water quality. And we can come back to you and talk to you about that again once we've made a bit of progress there. We just wanted to share this result with you for the northern parts of the region, because we're talking with others in your community about it, and we want you to be across that as we do that.
Thank you. Rawinia.
Just before I get into my actual questions, I got a couple of grammatical questions I don't understand. What's salinity?
So seawater.
Seawater.
So, but it might not necessarily be seawater. It could be. It's hard to distinguish between brackish water and pure seawater, but it is water that has a high mineralogy, and it could be, salt, calcium, sodium chloride, or it could be something else. But in the context of your geology, it's very likely that it's seawater derived.
And are you only really finding water with high salinity closest to the coastal line?
No. It's in the basement rock, underlying the gravels and sands are marine beds, and that has a very high salinity signal. And that could be what's called connate water, which is water that's deposited as the sediment is deposited, or I suspect in the northern areas that's what it is, or it's water that is able to flow inland for some reason. But in Poverty Bay, the salinity that we've found is inland, disconnected from the coast, and perhaps Joanne can, she's aware of it as much as we are at this moment. So it's not.
And Stu, that might be historical, right? That might have arrived, I don't know, millions of years ago.
Or coming from depth.
Okay.
I'm not finished. What? Resistivity?
Resistivity is the electrical signal that, so the resistance, rocks, water, seawater has resistance to electrical current. So that's what the whole technique is actually relying on and measuring, just how resistant to electrical current those formations are.
But needing to know the resistivity tells us how hard it might be to access that particular water. Yes or no?
No, nothing to do with that. Just
more about the presence of water, being able to say whether this is a property.
The property, yeah, Ben's right.
It's the properties of the rock and the geology.
It gets complicated, which is why scientists get involved. A rock could have the same, very different types of rock could have the same resistivity. So that's why you need other pieces of information to allow that to constrain the interpretation. So that's why we drilled bores and collected the core.
I'll Google the rest of my words. But
we can give you guys a bit of an explanation. We'll put something down you can read. Yeah.
Permeability in this context.
Permeability is how much, in this context, is how easy is it for water to flow within a particular rock type. So in clay, it can hold a lot of water, but it has very low permeability. The water just can't move. Whereas gravel has very high permeability because there's large pore spaces.
And so we need to know that to know how far the water can move around under the ground.
Well, in the context of the council's allocation model, that measurement of permeability is critical, because that allows how, if you pump from a well, if it's very transmissive, that effect will be quite large. If it's very permeable, if it's not permeable, then you get hardly any water out of it, and the effect is very local. So from the council's management perspective, that's really probably the most important piece of information that this work will give.
Thank you. These are my actual questions. Who owns this data now, and is the report publicly available?
Jane.
So the data ownership's an interesting question. What we're trying to do with local communities in the north is to set up governance arrangements around access to the data. The data has been collected by GNS and Kanoa, much like the LiDAR data was collected by LINS. So, the data is there, it's publicly owned, but what we want to do is make sure that it is managed with data sovereignty principles in mind.
The only other question I had was really, from this first phase of the report, were you guys, the scientists and the experts, surprised at the availability of water? Was that a surprise to anybody?
I think we were surprised at the shallowness of the system, and just how shallow it was over the breadth of the survey area and in the northern blocks.
Does that then potentially increase the vulnerability of the northern communities of the East Coast?
I would say shallow groundwater systems are more vulnerable to surface contamination through land use than deeper systems. So yeah, it needs to be appropriately addressed, managed.
Thank you very much for your patience in answering my questions.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Rob?
It's good. Yeah, it's good to know that basically what's there. But is this actually giving us the volumes of what's there, or is this giving the depths? Is this giving us the depths of what's there? And you've talked about salinity of the water. Water quality is always going to be something. But we just turn this around to a straight economic. Everyone wants to protect the water, but from a straight economic focus, how much information is this really giving us as far as being able to know the volumes of water that's potentially there?
Okay. So in one sense, volumes is from a management perspective, volume is not that important. It's good to have a big volume, but how allocation is done is on recharge, how much new water comes into the system. So in answer to your question, the volumes are probably quite low, but what this work will help to inform is where are the more permeable areas of the system. So if you were to look for water, it will inform where you should drill, but also how that groundwater resource is connected to the surface waterways, the rivers and streams, and it will help you calculate or model how much recharge or replenishment of that groundwater system potentially occurs. occurs. It won't actually provide that information, but it'll provide the structure and the extent of how you would go about that next step. So recharge, how much is replenished?
If I could just add to Stu's response there, I think it's stark. It's quite a stark result. So we really, Stu and his won't tell you what the results are until they've done a lot of analysis. But it was really marked when they opened up the information for the first time and looked at it that these are small. Okay, and so I think this aligns what other people are saying up the coast. The drilling is showing something similar as well, that the systems are not large. And so if you're looking for water solutions up in that part of the region, they're more likely to be based on water storage, above ground water storage, than aquifer extraction.
Who's next?
Just a question. As part of your research, do you have any knowledge of any of the extraction practices that are happening at all up the coast? Do you know any volume that has been extracted from the ground, or who is extracting? Is that part of your research?
No, it's not in our remit at all. The only thing we would do would be to use those existing bore information, rates and testing to inform our interpretation.
This really gives you a picture of the substrata, what it looks like under the ground, and the capacity it has to hold water, rather than a measurement of the water itself.
Just another question on top of that. I mean, there's such a small volume of water compared to other areas, and yet we have such a high rainfall on that area up the coast, very high rainfall annually.
Mm-hmm.
Where is the water going then if it's not being in the groundwater?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. I think that goes back to my answer to one of the previous questions. That could well be going into the ground as recharge, and if there's a lot of recharge replenishment going on, that's a good sign, because it means that if you take water out, it is replenished relatively quickly. So that next component of work that Jane alluded to, the water budget, where we look at the stream flows and the connection between the surface water and the groundwater, will somewhat move towards answering that question of where does that water go? Does it all go offshore through the surface water networks, or is it going into the ground? And part of our work that we did with GDC was we took groundwater age samples from all of the bores that were drilled, and chemistry. So all those little pieces of information will help sort of inform that picture of exactly that question you asked: where does that water go, and how long does it take to occur?
Colin.
Thank you. Just a question. Back in the early 80s, there was a lot of well drilling in the Pondy Bay Flats, and testing and semi-artesian water, and a lot of salinity found. Are you accessing this data to help match your data?
Yeah, very much so. We'll use all of your bore log database, historical and new, to help our interpretation.
Nick and then Debbie. Oh, we just go all around. Let's go all around. Go, Nick.
Just as a follow-up from Councillor Elder's question about the use of data that we already have, I wonder whether or not you're considering investigating any of the traditional data. Our ancestors have been surveying the whenua and the waterways for 1,000 years, and whether any of that data or research might be useful in your study. Examples I would point to is a place called Whitikorka, which is about 25 k's inland, has a tradition with seals. But Whitikorka is a reference to the ability to grow plentiful amounts of food. That place has a reference between salinity and the brackish nature of water, but also sits alongside fresh waterways. My question comes from the amount of scale or detail you can get from your scale. I see in your graphs that your measurements are over 20-metre scales, 200-metre scales, but in the days of our ancestors, water ran very close together, the different types and varieties. Even here at Council, behind us is the Waimata River, and on the eastern bank of that river were places of mahi mara where the ancestors grew food, almost adjacent. And so a sense of scale in the collection of data could have some significance that just metres away where there is brackish water, there may well be Waimari or freshwater systems. In terms of that, what detail of scale are you able to reach, and whether or not you are considering researching into the traditional data that sits amongst the hapu and the iwi of the region?
I'll start, Stu, and then you can talk about the scale. Thank you for that. That's very interesting information. And I mean, as much as hapu and iwi are willing to share that information with us, we would value that. We don't expect that information should be shared, because some of that may not be, might be more tapu than that. But to the extent that you're willing to share information, we would certainly value that. That will help us to understand what we see. Stu, do you want to talk about the scale?
Actually, wider than that. There's absolutely no reason why we can't bring Mātauranga into the interpretation, and in fact we've spent the last 6 years doing exactly that in the Hiratonga with Ngāti Kahungunu, where we mapped and engaged and acquired that information from Ngāti Kahungunu and put it into a numerical framework, so a numerical model. So I guess we recognise the importance of it, and I guess the positive assistance that it can give to traditional science. So we'd love to go down that pathway.
Debbie. Joanne, did you want to add something? Thank you.
I was just going to add for the drilling that Council completed at the same time up the coast. Josh Hovell obviously had a lot to do with the engagement there, and talking a lot. I can only really speak to Aotearoa of the springs in the foothills there that many of the community utilise, and it actually caused us to shift one of our drilling locations to investigate outside of the aquifers, because obviously the aquifers are just down on the low, whereas the springs come out of the foothills. So we actually shifted one of our bore drilling sites because of advice that we were giving.
Debbie.
Thank you. I was just wondering what the timeline is for more information coming back with regards to the Poverty Bay flats. Have they already been mapped, and is that under analysis at the moment?
Yes, that's right. That's on that same timeline for analysis next year. But what we're wanting to do is something similar to what we are calling the ice cream diagram, that yellow and white one that Stu showed you, but trying to think of an easy way to communicate what's happening in Poverty Bay around salinity. So once we've put that together, we're trying to engage iwi. We had good engagement with them early days, but that was pre-Cyclone Gabriel, and I think since then, people have a lot of other things to deal with. So we're trying to put something together that will bring them back to the table to engage with the science as well. And we'll want to engage with you to let you know where that's getting to at the same time. So hopefully that can happen before the end of the year, that we can give you those first results. And then, next year you'll be hearing more from us as results come in.
Tēnā koutou. I'm Ani Pāhuruhuriwai. I'm from Wharekahika and Tairāwhiti, so I was really watching your presentation with interest, great interest. When the helicopter was flying down the river next to my house, it was really low, really loud, and really quite scary. And that was the feedback from a lot of our whānau, with the cattle scared and running around and breaking fences and all of that as well. So certainly it's caused a stir as the helicopter was flying around. Thank you for your response about the data sovereignty, and that there will be discussions happening with Hapu as well around that, and look forward. I was shocked by the presentation in terms of the lack of water, I suppose, that we have in the northern end. That is a huge concern, but information is power and helps us to understand, how better can we look at a future water supply for our mokopuna. So it's not a question, just a thank you for the information, but also just to let you know that did cause a lot of stir up
Yes,
here.
yeah.
I think what happened was the letter drop that was supposed to happen with some flyers didn't actually make it into the mailboxes, so that would have, that whole comm stuff would have helped delay a lot of fears at the time. But thank you for your presentation today, and I look forward to seeing you up the coast. Josh has done a great job in engaging. I can only speak for the northern end, but he's done a great job in keeping the engagement going, and also helping to interpret any data that he might have. And I guess that he would be the conduit to us accessing data in the future. So, yeah, thank you.
Oh, kia ora, and thank you for your comments. Look, we apologise for the upset. We had spent a lot of time trying to work through the comms in advance, and as you said, there was, as far as we knew, there was a letter drop, and there was information on social media and in the newspapers, but it obviously did not get through to a lot of people. So that, yeah, we're very disappointed about that, and we are so sorry that that it came as a surprise to people, because we know it's quite a presence, the helicopter, and if you know it's there and for good reason, that's one thing, but if you don't know what it's doing, that is it's pretty confronting. We have had a number of conversations in communities since then, and as you've talked about, we're looking at how we can share this information and share the decision making around the use of the data. So just hope to continue, to build those relationships with communities in the East Coast. I think that's the only way forward.
Thank you, Jane, and just a compliment from our chair of our Wharekauka Māori Committee. She was very pleased with her interaction with you in particular. So thank you.
Kia ora. Kia ora.
Thanks. I've just got a question on the data collection. Are those underground systems really quite stable? We go through very long periods of fluctuating water tables, and sometimes the water table can stay very high for very long. Do you have to factor that into when you're flying and collecting the data, or is that irrelevant to it?
Sure.
It's kind of irrelevant to it. That day length, I think, was probably a more important thing. If you flew during the winter, the flight times would be restricted. You wouldn't want to. We wouldn't want to fly after very heavy rain, because the system's not in equilibrium. But it definitely wasn't a large influencing factor in terms of when we flew, because that system is very stable. You don't have to repeat this again. It's not going to change in anyone here's lifetime, or for millennia.
So a period after heavy rain, when you've got a very high water table, you wouldn't expect much difference in the actual underground system.
No, that's right. It doesn't. The resistivity or the airborne electromagnetics, it doesn't actually sense water, but what it does do is water presence changes the resistance. So that's the only effect it would have. You would just get a different signal on a dry day compared to a very wet day.
Thank you.
Any last questions before we end? Hi, Jane, Ben, Stuart, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate that. Thank you for the work you've done in our region. Thank you also for listening, feedback from our community and adapting and changing how you do stuff to make sure we take our community along on this ride. Many thanks for your presentation today, and I see it's already been emailed to councillors, so that's fantastic. We do have a copy. Right. Thanks a lot.
Kia ora.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Joanne. Thanks a lot. Fantastic, and we look forward to following up with how we take the information from here. Many thanks.
Sorry, just if I may, just a compliment to you, Julian, just applying the treaty compass to your report. Really great to see that in use, and yeah, really good to read as well.
All good. Thanks a lot. Okay, I declare our meeting closed. I should do my job. Moved by Councillor Cranston, seconded by Councillor Pahuruhuriwai. All in favour? Contrary, carried.